Hi, my name's Rebecca. My grandmother slapped my 6-month-old daughter across the face during Sunday service. After years of emotional abuse, she called my baby, quote, possessed. And when I confronted her, the entire congregation watched in silence as she told me I was unfit to be a mother. Then my husband, Air Force Colonel James Mitchell, made one phone call that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The church sanctuary smelled like old hymnals and pine cleaner that morning. My heels clicked against the worn wooden floors as I walked inside, pretending everything was normal, pretending this was just another Sunday service. It wasn't, not for me. Sunday worship should have been a time of peace. Instead, it felt like walking into a battlefield where I'd already been declared the enemy. I scanned the pews, clutching my daughter Emma tighter to my chest, searching for Grandma Eleanor. And there she was, sitting in her usual spot, 3rd row from the front, Bible open on her lap. No one noticed how my steps faltered. No one cared. Her pearl necklace, the one Grandpa gave her before he passed, gleamed under the stained glass light. When I reached the pew, she barely looked up, her lips pressed into that familiar line of disapproval. That's when Emma started to fuss. Just small baby noises, nothing disruptive. I bounced her gently, trying to soothe her before the service began. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Can't you control that child?" she whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I froze, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. "She's just a baby, Eleanor," I whispered back, using her first name the way she'd insisted since James and I married. The organ music swelled as Pastor Mitchell began the service. I focused on the familiar hymn, letting the words wash over me while Emma settled against my shoulder. For a moment, I thought maybe this Sunday would be different, that Eleanor would keep her critiques to herself. I was wrong. Halfway through the sermon, Emma began to whimper. I reached for her bottle, but in my hurry, it slipped from my fingers, clattering against the wooden pew. A few heads turned. Heat rushed to my face as I bent to retrieve it. "Honestly, Rebecca," Eleanor hissed, "you're making a spectacle." I didn't respond. I'd learned years ago that engaging only made things worse. Emma's whimpers grew louder. I stood to take her to the church nursery, but Eleanor grabbed my arm. "Sit down," she commanded. "You'll disrupt the entire service." Her fingers dug into my skin. "She needs to be changed," I explained quietly. "I'll be right back." Eleanor's grip tightened. I said, "Sit down." I should have walked away. I should have ignored her, taken my daughter, and left. But years of conditioning, years of trying to please this woman who had never once approved of me, kept me rooted to the spot. I sat back down, attempting to quiet Emma with gentle bounces and whispered reassurances. Her cries grew louder. People were staring now, not just glancing, but full-on staring. Pastor Mitchell paused mid-sentence, his eyes finding mine. "Take that child out," Eleanor demanded, no longer bothering to whisper. I stood again, humiliation burning through me. But before I could step into the aisle, Eleanor reached for Emma. "Give her to me," she said. "I'll show you how to handle a child." I pulled back instinctively. "No, Eleanor. I've got her." Emma wailed louder, her little face scrunched in red. "You clearly don't," Eleanor snapped. "You've never known how to be a mother." The words stung like they always did. No matter how many parenting books I read, how many pediatrician appointments I meticulously prepared for, how many nights I spent rocking Emma to sleep, Eleanor's verdict remained unchanged. I was failing. "Please," I whispered, desperation creeping into my voice. "Just let me take her out." What happened next plays in slow motion whenever I remember it. Eleanor's hand shot out. Not toward me, but toward Emma. A sharp, swift movement. The sound of skin on skin. Emma's cry cut off abruptly, replaced by a shocked silence, then a wail that shook the rafters. The red mark on her soft cheek blazed like an accusation. The sanctuary went silent. Even Pastor Mitchell stopped mid-word. I stood there, unable to process what had just happened. My mother-in-law, Diane, gasped from the pew behind us. "Eleanor!" she hissed. But Eleanor didn't look ashamed. She looked vindicated. "That's how you quiet a child," she said, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "She's possessed by a willful spirit, just like her mother." Something in me broke. Years of biting my tongue, of enduring her criticisms, her backhanded compliments, her constant undermining, it all fell away. I clutched Emma to my chest, her cries muffled against my shoulder, and found my voice. "Don't you ever touch my daughter again," I said, each word clear and sharp. Eleanor's eyes widened, not with remorse, but with indignation. "How dare you speak to me that way, after everything I've done for you?" I almost laughed. What had she done except make me feel worthless since the day James brought me home? "What you've done," I said, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it, "is assault a baby." "My baby?" Eleanor scoffed. "Assault? Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. Children need discipline." From behind me, I heard James' mother stand. "That wasn't discipline, Eleanor," Diane said, her normally gentle voice firm. "That was cruelty." Eleanor turned to the congregation, most of whom were now openly staring. "You see how they treat me?" she said, gesturing wildly. "After everything I've sacrificed, my own grandson married this unfit mother, and now I'm vilified for trying to help." I felt James' hand on my shoulder. I hadn't even seen him approach from where he'd been sitting with the other military families. His face was stone, his colonel's authority evident in every line of his body. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "Not to me, but to Eleanor. And you will never be alone with my daughter again." Eleanor's face contorted. "James Mitchell, don't you dare take that tone with me." "I changed your diapers, young man." James didn't flinch. "And you just slapped my 6-month-old daughter." "We're done here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As we turned to leave, Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek. "She's unfit. Look at how that child behaves. Rebecca has never been worthy of this family." Pastor Mitchell finally found his voice. "Eleanor, that's enough." But she wasn't finished. She stood, pointing at me, at Emma, her finger shaking with rage. "That woman trapped my grandson. She's never belonged in this church, in this family. She's turning you all against me." I walked out, James's arm around me, Emma still crying against my shoulder. My sister-in-law Melissa followed, along with James's parents. As the heavy church doors closed behind us, cutting off Eleanor's tirade, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For 7 years, I'd endured Eleanor's subtle cruelty, her constant criticism, her whispered comments about my background, my appearance, my worthiness to be a Mitchell. In the church parking lot, under the bright southern sun, I finally broke down. Emma had quieted, the red mark on her cheek already fading, but the wound in my heart felt raw and exposed. "She hit our baby," I whispered, my voice cracking. "She actually hit her." James pulled us both close, his uniform buttons pressing into my cheek. "I know," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "And it will never happen again." Diane approached, her face lined with concern. "Let me see her," she said gently. I handed Emma to her grandmother, who examined the mark with tears in her eyes. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured. "I'm so sorry." James's father, retired Major General William Mitchell, stood beside his wife, his expression grim. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "Eleanor has been a problem for years." I looked up, surprised. I'd always thought I was the only one who saw through Eleanor's carefully cultivated image of the doting grandmother, the pillar of the church community. "You knew?" William nodded. "We've seen how she treats you, Rebecca. We should have said something sooner." Melissa, James' younger sister, touched my arm. "We all knew," she admitted. "Eleanor's been cruel to everyone James ever dated, but with you, it was different. More intense." James' jaw tightened. Because Rebecca didn't back down, he said. She didn't let Eleanor run our lives like the others did. He turned to me, his eyes softer. You stood your ground. Even when I didn't see what was happening. The admission hung in the air between us. For years, I'd tried to tell him how his grandmother made me feel, but he'd always brushed it off. She's just old-fashioned, he'd say. She doesn't mean anything by it. Now, standing in that church parking lot, the truth was unavoidable. Eleanor hadn't just been old-fashioned. She'd been deliberately, systematically cruel. And now she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. James pulled out his phone. "Who are you calling?" I asked, wiping tears from my face. His expression was resolute. "The Squadron," he said simply. "And then the police." My heart skipped. "The police? James, I don't know if—" He cut me off, his voice gentle but firm. "She assaulted our daughter, Rebecca. In front of witnesses. This isn't about family politics anymore." He was right. I knew he was right. But still, my stomach churned at the thought of what would follow. Police reports. Questions. Eleanor's inevitable denials. Her accusations. While James made his calls, I sat in our SUV with Emma, now sleeping peacefully against my chest. The mark on her cheek had faded to a faint pink, but I couldn't stop seeing Eleanor's hand connecting with my baby's face. Couldn't stop hearing that sharp smack, then Emma's shocked silence before her wail of pain and confusion. How could anyone hit a baby? How could Eleanor, who proudly displayed Emma's photos in her home, who bragged about her great-granddaughter to her church friends, do such a thing? Diane slid into the seat beside me, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Rebecca," she said softly, "there's something you should know about Eleanor." I looked up, waiting. She's always been this way, controlling, manipulative. When James's grandfather was alive, he kept her in check, but since he passed, she trailed off, then squared her shoulders. What I'm trying to say is, this isn't your fault. None of it is. For 7 years, I tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect Mitchell. I'd changed how I dressed, how I spoke, which friends I kept. I'd moved to this small military town, away from my family, my support system, all to please a woman who was determined to never be pleased. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Not accusing, just wondering. Diane looked ashamed. We should have, but Eleanor, she has a way of making everyone feel like they're crazy for questioning her. And she's William's mother. It's complicated. I understood complicated family dynamics all too well. My own parents had divorced when I was 12, my father disappearing to start a new family in Arizona. I'd wanted so badly to belong to the Mitchells, to their tradition and stability. James returned to the car, his face grim but resolved. It's done, he said. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes is sending some of the guys over to help us move your things out of the guest house. We'd been living in Eleanor's guest house since James returned from his last deployment, saving for our own place while I finished my nursing degree. The arrangement had seemed logical. Free housing, help with Emma when I had late classes. But the cost had been higher than I ever imagined. And the police? I asked. James sighed. They're sending an officer to take a statement, they said. They said it would help to have photos of Emma's cheek, even though the mark is fading. The thought of photographing my baby's injury made me feel sick, but I nodded. Evidence. We needed evidence. As we drove away from the church, I watched it grow smaller in the side mirror. 7 years of Sundays in those pews. 7 years of trying to belong. And now, in the space of 10 minutes, everything had changed. I should have felt devastated. Instead, with each mile that separated us from Eleanor, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. James reached across the console and took my hand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I should have seen it sooner. I squeezed his fingers. We both should have. In the back seat, Emma slept on, unaware that her world had just been turned upside down. Or maybe, I thought, watching her peaceful face in the rearview mirror, it had finally been set right. By the time we reached Eleanor's property, a sprawling historic home on the outskirts of town, 3 military vehicles were already parked in the circular driveway. Men and women in uniform stood at attention as our car pulled up. James's squadron. His military family. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped forward as we parked, his expression serious but kind. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, saluting. "Ma'am, we're here to help." The next few hours passed in a blur. While I nursed Emma in our bedroom, James and his squadron members efficiently packed our belongings. Boxes appeared, were filled, labeled, and loaded into vehicles with military precision. Diane and William arrived with pizza for everyone. Melissa brought garbage bags and packing tape. What should have taken days was accomplished in hours. I sat on our stripped bed, watching as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez carefully wrapped the ceramic lamp my mother had given us as a wedding gift. "My abuela was like her," he said quietly, not looking up from his task. "Thought she owned everyone. Thought she could do whatever she wanted because she was old." He secured the lamp in bubble wrap. "Family is supposed to protect you, not hurt you." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd told myself that Eleanor's behavior was normal, that I was being oversensitive, that if I just tried harder, she would accept me. Now, surrounded by people efficiently helping us escape, I realized how wrong I'd been. This wasn't normal. This wasn't acceptable. And it wasn't my fault. As the last box was loaded, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Officer Jenkins, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took our statements. She photographed Emma's cheek, where the mark was now barely visible. "Even if it doesn't leave a bruise," she explained, "the witness statements are significant. Multiple people saw what happened." "Will she be arrested?" I asked, not sure what answer I wanted to hear. Officer Jenkins sighed. "That's up to the district attorney, but a case will be opened. Elder or not, she assaulted a minor. That's serious." She handed me a card with a case number. "In the meantime, I'd recommend a restraining order." A restraining order. Against James's grandmother. 6 months ago, the thought would have been unimaginable. Now it felt necessary, vital even. "What happens next?" I asked, looking from Officer Jenkins to James. It was Lieutenant Colonel Hayes who answered, stepping forward with the authority of a man used to managing crises. "You'll stay with us tonight," he said. "Sarah's already made up the guest room. Tomorrow, we'll help you find a place of your own." I started to object. We couldn't impose like that. But Hayes held up a hand. "Mitchell's one of ours," he said simply. "That makes you and Emma one of ours too. The squadron takes care of its own." As we prepared to leave, I looked back at the guest house that had been our home. It was beautiful, with its wraparound porch and floor-to-ceiling windows. But it had never truly been ours. It had been another way for Eleanor to maintain control, to keep us under her influence, to remind me daily that I was living on her charity, in her domain. James helped me into the car, Emma secured in her car seat behind us. As we pulled away, following the caravan of military vehicles loaded with our possessions, I saw movement at the main house. Eleanor stood at the window, watching us leave. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of her judgment, her anger. For a moment, our eyes locked. Then James turned onto the main road, and she was gone. That night, in Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' comfortable guest room, I lay awake long after James and Emma had fallen asleep. The day's events kept replaying in my mind. Eleanor's hand striking Emma's cheek, the shocked silence of the congregation, the swift response of James's squadron. Everything had changed so quickly. Yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this moment had been building for years. Eleanor's criticisms, her backhanded compliments, her constant undermining, they weren't just the habits of a difficult old woman. They were deliberate acts meant to isolate me, to make me doubt myself, to keep me vulnerable and dependent on her approval. And I had let her do it, believing that if I just tried harder, she would finally accept me. James stirred beside me. "Can't sleep?" he murmured, reaching for my hand in the darkness. I intertwined my fingers with his. "Just thinking," I whispered back. He was silent for a moment. "I failed you," he said finally, his voice tight with emotion. "I should have protected you and Emma. I should have seen what she was doing." I turned to face him, though I could barely make out his features in the dim light. "We both missed it. I said. Or maybe we didn't want to see it. He pulled me closer. It stops now, he promised. She will never hurt either of you again. I believed him. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe. In the crib beside our bed, Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the day's drama, the upheaval, the decisions being made that would shape her future. I watched the rise and fall of her tiny chest, the perfect bow of her lips, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. Eleanor had been wrong about so many things, but especially about this. I was not an unfit mother. I was exactly the mother Emma needed, one who would stand between her and anyone who tried to harm her, even if that person was family. As dawn broke over the haze, quiet suburban street, I finally drifted off to sleep, one hand resting on Emma's crib, the other still clasped in James's. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The worst was behind us. Or, so I thought. The morning sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains, casting warm patterns across Emma's sleeping face. I watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her tiny chest like a prayer. The events of yesterday still felt surreal, dreamlike, except the memory of Eleanor's hand connecting with my daughter's cheek. That was viscerally, horribly real. James had already left for the base, his uniform crisp, despite the chaos of our lives. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes's wife, Sarah, had quietly set coffee outside our door, along with a note offering to watch Emma while I showered. These small kindnesses nearly broke me. For so long, I'd navigated Eleanor's world of backhanded compliments and veiled criticisms that genuine kindness felt almost foreign. I dressed in yesterday's clothes. We'd packed in such a hurry that finding fresh ones seemed impossible, and carried Emma downstairs. Sarah greeted me with a warm smile and outstretched arms. "There's my sweet girl," she cooed, taking Emma with practiced ease. "Rebecca, there's breakfast in the kitchen. Real food, not just coffee." The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee, so different from Eleanor's pristine, barely used space that always smelled faintly of furniture polish. Sarah's teenager had left homework spread across one end of the table, a half-eaten apple perched precariously on a calculus textbook. It was lived in, comfortable, safe. I was halfway through a slice of cinnamon toast when my phone rang. Unknown number. My heart stuttered, but I answered anyway. "Rebecca? Mitchell?" A woman's voice, professionally neutral. "This is Marianne Wilcox from Child Protective Services." The toast turned to ash in my mouth. Child Protective Services? Why would they be calling? "We've received a report concerning your daughter, Emma Mitchell, age 6 months. I'd like to schedule a home visit to discuss this matter." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. A report? What kind of report? But I already knew. Eleanor. This was Eleanor. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the specifics over the phone, Mrs. Mitchell. When would be a convenient time to meet?" I looked around the Hayes kitchen. Not my home, not my space. We're staying with friends right now. We had to leave our previous residence suddenly. There was a pause, the scratch of a pen on paper. "I see. And why did you have to leave suddenly, Mrs. Mitchell?" Every instinct screamed caution. This woman wasn't my friend. She was evaluating me, judging whether I was fit to keep my own child. My husband's grandmother assaulted our daughter yesterday. We filed a police report. Officer Jenkins has the details. Another pause. "I see," she repeated, but her tone had shifted slightly. "And your current location?" I gave her the Hayes' address, explained that we were temporarily staying with James's commanding officer while looking for our own place. "I can be there at 2 this afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell. Please have your daughter present." She hung up before I could respond. Sarah found me still clutching the phone, tears streaming down my face. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" I tried to explain through hiccuping sobs. "Child Protective Services." An accusation. Eleanor's final, most devastating attack. Sarah's expression hardened. "That vicious old woman," she muttered, bouncing Emma gently as she reached for her own phone. "John needs to hear about this." Within an hour, the Hayes living room had transformed into a war room. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had returned from base, bringing with him the squadron's JAG officer, Captain Fernandez. James arrived minutes later, still in uniform, his face grim but determined. "She's claiming we're unfit parents," he said, pacing the length of the room. "After what she did." Captain Fernandez, a petite woman with sharp eyes and sharper mind, tapped her pen against her legal pad. "This is unfortunately common in family disputes," she explained. "She's trying to seize control of the narrative. If she can convince CPS that you're the problem, not her, she neutralizes the assault charge." She turned to me. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to tell me everything about yesterday. Every detail." I recounted the church service, Eleanor's escalating behavior, the slap, its aftermath. Captain Fernandez took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification. "And before yesterday? How was your relationship with Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell?" The question opened a floodgate. 7 years of subtle cruelty. The comments about my background. "From a broken home, aren't you, dear?" My appearance. A bit plain for a Mitchell wife, but James always did march to his own drummer. My capabilities as a mother. "Babies need routine, Rebecca. Something you clearly don't understand." "She once switched Emma's formula while I was in the shower," I recalled, a memory surfacing that I'd almost forgotten. "Said the brand I chose was cheap and would give her colic. Emma was up all night with stomach pains." James looked stricken. "You never told me that." I shrugged helplessly. "You were deployed, and when you came home, I don't know, it sounded petty, like I was overreacting." Captain Fernandez frowned. "That's not petty, Mrs. Mitchell. That's medical interference. Did you tell Emma's pediatrician?" I nodded. "Dr. Lawson made a note in Emma's file. She said it happened more often than people realize. Grandparents overriding parents' decisions." The captain made another note. "Dr. Lawson might be a useful witness if this escalates." By the time the CPS worker arrived, we had assembled our defense. The police report from Officer Jenkins, a written statement from Pastor Mitchell about the church incident, and Emma's medical records, including Dr. Lawson's notes about the formula incident. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and Sarah had written character references for both James and me. We were as prepared as we could be. Marianne Wilcox was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and a professional demeanor that revealed nothing. She accepted the documents with a nod, but her focus remained primarily on Emma, who was contentedly playing on a blanket at my feet. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand yesterday was traumatic," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "But I need to ask some difficult questions." What followed was an hour of increasingly personal interrogation. My childhood, my parents' divorce, my relationship with James, my pregnancy, my postpartum mental health. She asked about Eleanor, how long we'd lived in her guest house, why we'd chosen that arrangement, the nature of our relationship before yesterday. With each question, I felt myself being dissected, examined for flaws. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said finally, setting aside her notepad, "the report I received alleges that you have an unstable home environment, a history of emotional outbursts, and that you manufacture claims of abuse to isolate your daughter from her great-grandmother." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "That's not true," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "None of that is true." Ms. Wilcox's expression remained neutral. "The report further alleges that you fabricated yesterday's incident to prevent Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell from maintaining a relationship with her great-granddaughter, whom she believes is being neglected." James made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a growl. "My grandmother assaulted our 6-month-old daughter in front of an entire congregation," he said, his colonel's authority evident in every syllable. "That is not a fabrication." For the first time, Ms. Wilcox's professional mask slipped slightly. "Colonel Mitchell, I understand your frustration, but I have to investigate every report thoroughly, regardless of its source." She turned back to me. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you have any idea why your grandmother-in-law would make these accusations?" I thought of Eleanor's face in the church, the righteous anger when I dared to challenge her. The years of subtle undermining, of positioning herself as the authority on everything from how I dressed to how I parented. "She can't control me anymore," I said simply. "And she can't stand it." Ms. Wilcox nodded slowly, making a final note before closing her folder. I'll need to speak with some of the witnesses from yesterday, she said, standing. And I'll be contacting Dr. Lawson. In the meantime... She paused, her gaze softening slightly as it fell on Emma, now dozing against my chest. Take care of her. And yourselves. These situations are never easy. It wasn't exactly reassurance, but it wasn't condemnation either. As the door closed behind her, I sagged against James, suddenly exhausted. You did great, Captain Fernandez said, gathering her papers. She's thorough, but fair. The fact that Eleanor filed this complaint immediately after assaulting Emma won't look good for her. She touched my shoulder lightly. Try to rest. This is just the beginning. The beginning. Not the resolution, not the end of the nightmare, just the first battle in what promised to be a long war. That night, after Emma was asleep, James and I sat on the Hayes' back porch, the humid southern air wrapping around us like a blanket. We need our own place, he said, his voice low to avoid waking the household. Staying here is fine for now, but CPS will want to see that we have a stable home. I nodded, though the thought of house hunting in the middle of this chaos made my head spin. We'll start looking tomorrow, I agreed. Somewhere in town, close to the base. James was silent for a long moment. Actually, he said finally, I've been thinking. Maybe this is our chance to make a bigger change. I turned to look at him, puzzled. What kind of change? He took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. I've put in for a transfer to Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, hundreds of miles away from Eleanor, from this small town where everyone knew everyone's business, where Sunday's scene at church was probably already gossip fodder at every dinner table. But your squadron, I began. Your career, he shook his head. My career will be fine. Hayes supports it, and the squadron understands. He squeezed my hand. More importantly, you and Emma will be safe. Really safe. Not just temporarily out of Eleanor's reach. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She'll never stop, will she? James's expression was grim. Not as long as we're here. Not as long as she can reach us. He was right. Eleanor's influence in this town ran deep. She'd been a pillar of the community for decades, a wealthy widow who donated generously to local causes, who hosted charity events in her historic home. Her version of events would always find sympathetic ears here. What about our stuff? I asked, practical concerns flooding in. Our security deposit? My classes? James smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in days. The squadron's already handling the logistics. Your nursing program can transfer credits to schools near Andrews. We've got this, Becca. The old nickname, one he hadn't used since before Emma was born, brought tears to my eyes. When? I whispered. How soon? He pulled me close, his heartbeat steady under my ear. Orders should come through next week. We could be moved by the end of the month. The relief was so intense it was almost painful. A month. Just one more month in Eleanor's shadow, and then freedom. Real freedom. Not just the temporary escape of the Hayes guest room. The next morning brought another crisis. James had just left for the base when my phone rang. Dr. Lawson's office. Mrs. Mitchell? Dr. Lawson asked me to call. There's been an axe situation regarding Emma's medical records. My blood ran cold. What kind of situation? The receptionist's voice dropped. A woman claiming to be Emma's legal guardian tried to access her complete file yesterday. She had documentation that appeared legitimate, but Dr. Lawson was suspicious and denied access. Eleanor. It had to be Eleanor. But how had she obtained guardianship documents? Unless... These documents, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Did they look new? The receptionist hesitated. I don't think so. They looked official, but older. Predating Emma's birth, actually, which is partly why Dr. Lawson questioned them. Predating Emma's birth. A horrible suspicion formed in my mind. Thank you for alerting me, I said. Please tell Dr. Lawson we're dealing with a family situation and no one should access Emma's records without my direct, in-person consent. As soon as I hung up, I called Captain Fernandez. I need to check something, I said without preamble. When we lived in Eleanor's guest house, did we ever sign anything giving her legal rights over Emma? There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Not that I've seen in your documentation, she said slowly. But if you signed something without understanding its implications. The memory hit me with stunning clarity. 2 weeks after Emma was born, when I was still recovering from an emergency C-section, Eleanor had brought papers for us to sign. Just updating my will, she'd explained. Making sure Emma is provided for if anything happens. I'd been exhausted, in pain, overwhelmed with new motherhood. James had been dealing with deployment preparations. We'd both signed without reading carefully. I think she tricked us, I whispered. I think she got us to sign guardianship papers while claiming it was about her will. Captain Fernandez's voice sharpened. Do you have copies of what you signed? I didn't. Of course I didn't. Eleanor had taken the papers, promised to file them properly. I trusted her. I need to see those documents, Captain Fernandez said. If she's falsely claiming guardianship, that's a serious legal issue. But how? Eleanor certainly wouldn't hand them over voluntarily. And with the CPS investigation ongoing, we couldn't risk any action that might appear confrontational. Leave it with me, Captain Fernandez said finally. I know a family court judge who can issue an order for disclosure. In the meantime, alert Emma's doctor that no one should access her records or remove her from your care without proper verification. The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. James and I barely left the Hayes house, afraid that any moment might bring another attack from Eleanor. When Captain Fernandez finally called, her voice was tight with controlled anger. We found the documents, she said, and it's worse than we thought. Mrs. Mitchell didn't just trick you into signing guardianship papers. She created an entire false narrative about your mental health. According to the documents Eleanor had filed with the family court, I had severe postpartum depression, bordering on psychosis. James, preparing for deployment, had been concerned for Emma's safety and had granted his grandmother temporary guardianship until my condition stabilized. None of it was true. All of it had been filed legally, with our unwitting signatures as evidence. How did she get away with this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why weren't we notified when she filed these papers? Captain Fernandez sighed. The notification would have been sent to your legal residence, which, at the time, was Eleanor's guest house. She probably intercepted it. And without any challenge from you, the court provisionally accepted the arrangement. The betrayal was staggering. While living under her roof, using her guest house, accepting what I thought was her support, Eleanor had been systematically undermining my legal rights to my own child. What do we do now? I asked, struggling to process the enormity of her deception. Captain Fernandez's voice hardened with resolve. Now? Now we fight back. Hard. The conference room at the JAG office felt too small for the storm brewing inside me. Captain Fernandez spread documents across the polished table, each one a piece of Eleanor's elaborate deception. Medical evaluations I'd never undergone. Witness statements from people I'd never met. Court filings with my signature, digitally inserted where I'd never signed. This is fraud, James said, his voice dangerously quiet. Multiple counts of fraud, Captain Fernandez nodded grimly. Forgery, misrepresentation to the court, fabrication of medical evidence, the list goes on. And it's not just sloppy work. This was meticulously planned. She pointed to a date on one of the documents. She started building this case before Emma was even born. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor hadn't suddenly decided to take Emma from us after the church incident. She'd been planning it for months, maybe since the day we told her I was pregnant. All those offers of help, the insistence that we move into her guest house to save money, the constant presence in our lives, it had never been about supporting us. It had been about controlling us. Controlling Emma. Why? I whispered, not really expecting an answer. Why go to these lengths? Captain Fernandez looked up from her notes, her expression softening slightly. Some people can't distinguish between love and control. To her, they might be the same thing. It wasn't enough. It didn't explain the deliberate cruelty, the calculated deception, the willingness to destroy her grandson's family to get what she wanted. It doesn't matter why, James said firmly. What matters is stopping her. Now, permanently. He turned to Captain Fernandez. What's our next step? She closed her folder with a decisive snap. We file a countersuit. Immediately. We move to invalidate the guardianship on grounds of fraud, and we file for a permanent restraining order against Eleanor Mitchell. Simultaneously, we cooperate fully with the CPS investigation, providing them with evidence of Eleanor's fabrications. It sounded simple when she laid it out, a clear path through the legal brambles Eleanor had planted. But nothing about this situation was simple. What about the transfer? I asked. If we're in the middle of legal proceedings here, can we still move to Maryland? Captain Fernandez hesitated, glancing at James. That's complicated, she admitted. Leaving the jurisdiction during an active case involving a minor can look like flight, even when there are legitimate military orders involved. The walls seemed to close in a little tighter. We were trapped, not just in this town, but in Eleanor's web. Even our attempt to escape had been anticipated and countered. So what you're saying, James said slowly, is that we're stuck here until this is resolved. Captain Fernandez nodded reluctantly. Unless we can expedite proceedings significantly, yes, and family court cases aren't known for their speed. I closed my eyes, trying to master the panic rising in my chest. Months. We could be trapped here for months, living in temporary housing, looking over our shoulders, waiting for Eleanor's next move. Emma would grow from infant to toddler under the shadow of this fight. The thought was unbearable. There has to be another way, I said, opening my eyes to find both James and Captain Fernandez watching me with concern. Something we're not seeing. Captain Fernandez tapped her pen against her legal pad, considering. There might be one option, she said finally. It's unconventional, but given the circumstances, we could request an emergency hearing based on the fraudulent nature of the original filings. If we can demonstrate that Eleanor deliberately misled the court, a judge might be willing to expedite the process. Hope flickered, fragile but present. How soon? James asked. Captain Fernandez shrugged. Depends on the judge. Could be weeks instead of months. But it's still not going to be immediate. Weeks. Not ideal, but better than the endless limbo I'd been imagining. Do it, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Whatever it takes. The next morning brought unexpected allies. Sarah Hayes had organized what she called a support squad. Wives from the Squadron, along with a few civilian friends, all determined to help us weather the storm. They arrived at the Hayes' house bearing casseroles, baby supplies, and more importantly, information. Eleanor's been talking, explained Melissa, James's sister, who had driven 3 hours to join the gathering. She's telling everyone who'll listen that you're unstable, that you're turning James against his family. She rolled her eyes. Most people aren't buying it, especially after what happened at church. But she's persistent. A middle-aged woman I recognized from church, Susan Parker, the choir director, nodded in agreement. She came to the church board meeting last night, demanding that Pastor Mitchell be censured for, quote, taking sides in a family matter. When that didn't work, she threatened to withdraw her annual donation. Susan's expression was grim but satisfied. Pastor told her the church wasn't for sale. Another woman, Denise, from the base commissary, leaned forward. My cousin works at Dr. Lawson's office. Eleanor showed up there yesterday, making a scene about how she's Emma's real guardian and demanding her medical records. Dr. Lawson personally escorted her out and told her never to come back. Small victories, each one a reminder that Eleanor's influence, while significant, wasn't absolute. As the women shared information and strategies, I felt something shifting inside me. For years, I'd been isolated. First by the frequent moves of military life, then by Eleanor's subtle campaign to separate me from potential allies. Now, sitting in Sarah Hayes' living room surrounded by women determined to help, I realized I wasn't alone. I'd never truly been alone. "We've started a phone tree," Sarah explained, showing me a handwritten list of names and numbers. "If Eleanor shows up anywhere, we know within minutes. She can't make a move in this town without us knowing about it." It was a protection I hadn't expected, hadn't even known to ask for. These women, many of whom I barely knew, had created a shield around Emma and me without being asked. Why? I couldn't help asking. Why go to all this trouble for us? The women exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. It was Denise who answered, her voice gentle but firm. "Because what's happening to you could happen to any of us. Military families are vulnerable. We live far from our support systems, we move frequently, we deal with deployments and separations. If we don't protect each other, who will?" Susan nodded in agreement. "And because Eleanor Mitchell has been bullying people in this town for decades. She's used her money and her social position to get her way, to silence anyone who crosses her. It's time someone stood up to her." There was steel in her voice, determination that matched my own growing resolve. That afternoon, Captain Fernandez called with news. "We've been granted an emergency hearing," she said. The excitement in her voice barely contained. Judge Watkins was, let's just say he was not pleased when he saw the evidence of fraud. "We're on the docket for next Tuesday. 5 days. In 5 days, we could potentially end this nightmare, clear our names, and begin the process of truly escaping Eleanor's reach." The news energized us all. James threw himself into preparations, working closely with Captain Fernandez to organize evidence and testimony. I focused on Emma, on maintaining her routine despite the chaos surrounding us, on finding moments of normalcy in the midst of crisis. And our unexpected allies continued their vigilant watch, tracking Eleanor's movements, reporting her attempts to sway public opinion against us. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the haze-darkened living room, Emma sleeping peacefully in my arms, watching the minutes tick by on the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Each second brought us closer to confrontation, to resolution, to freedom, but also to facing Eleanor across a courtroom, to having our lives dissected by strangers, to the very real possibility that, despite everything, we might lose. "You should be sleeping." James's voice, soft in the darkness, made me look up. He stood in the doorway, wearing sweatpants and a faded Air Force Academy t-shirt, looking younger than his 35 years. "So should you," I countered, shifting to make room for him on the sofa. He sat beside me, one arm around my shoulders, the other gently stroking Emma's downy hair. "What if we lose tomorrow?" I whispered, giving voice to the fear that had been haunting me. James was quiet for a long moment. "Then we appeal," he said finally. "And if that doesn't work, we appeal again. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with, and then we find another way." His determination should have been reassuring, but it only highlighted the enormity of what we were facing. "It could take years," I said, my voice breaking. "Years of our lives, of Emma's childhood spent fighting your grandmother." James turned to face me, his expression serious in the dim light. "Listen to me, Rebecca. Tomorrow isn't just about winning or losing a court case. It's about standing up and saying enough. It's about showing Emma that we will always, always protect her, no matter the cost." He touched my cheek gently. "Even if the legal battle continues, the truth will be spoken tomorrow. That's a victory in itself." His words settled over me like a blanket, warm and comforting. He was right. Whatever happened in that courtroom, we would have broken the silence, exposed Eleanor's deception, reclaimed our narrative. The legal outcome mattered, of course it mattered, but it wasn't the only measure of success. "We've already won," I said softly. "The moment we decided to fight back, we won." James smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in days. "There's my warrior," he said, kissing my forehead. "Now come to bed. Tomorrow we need to be at our strongest." I followed him back to the guest room, Emma still sleeping against my shoulder, feeling a strange sense of peace despite the battle ahead. Whatever happened tomorrow, we would face it together. And that was enough. The courthouse loomed gray and imposing against the morning sky. We arrived early, escorted by Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and 3 other officers from the squadron, a show of solidarity that brought a lump to my throat. Captain Fernandez met us at the entrance, her uniform crisp, her expression confident. "Remember," she said as we walked toward the courtroom, "stay calm, stick to the facts, and let the evidence speak for itself." Eleanor was already inside, seated beside her attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. She didn't look at us as we entered, her attention fixed on a document in front of her. But I could feel the tension radiating from her, the barely contained fury that we had dared to challenge her authority. As we took our seats, the door opened again. Pastor Mitchell entered, followed by Dr. Lawson, Susan Parker, and to my surprise, William and Diane, James' parents. They filed into the benches behind us, a solid wall of support. Eleanor finally looked up, her expression briefly flickering with something like shock before hardening again into cold disdain. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmured conversations. Judge Watkins entered, a stern-looking man with salt-and-pepper hair and piercing blue eyes. He took his seat, reviewed the documents before him, then looked up, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the guardianship of Emma Louise Mitchell," he began, his voice resonant in the hushed room. "Based on allegations of fraud and misrepresentation in the original filing, let's get straight to it." What followed was both more clinical and more emotional than I had expected. Captain Fernandez presented our case methodically, each piece of evidence building on the last to create a damning portrait of Eleanor's deception. She called witnesses, Drive, Lawson, who testified that I had never shown signs of postpartum psychosis, Pastor Mitchell, who spoke of our regular church attendance and appropriate parenting, even Diane, who described her shock at discovering Eleanor's manipulation of her son and daughter-in-law. Eleanor's attorney tried to paint a different picture, of a concerned great-grandmother stepping in to protect a vulnerable infant from an unstable mother and an absent father. But his arguments felt hollow against the weight of documentary evidence, the forged signatures, the fabricated medical reports, the intercepted court notices. Then it was Eleanor's turn to testify. She took the stand with the practiced dignity of someone accustomed to deference, her pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I only ever wanted what was best for Emma," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "James is often away, serving our country, and Rebecca, well, she's young, inexperienced. I saw how she struggled after Emma was born, how overwhelmed she was." I bit my lip, fighting the urge to interrupt, to challenge the narrative she was constructing. Captain Fernandez squeezed my hand warningly. "Let her talk. Let her reveal herself," Eleanor continued, describing my erratic behavior, my emotional instability, my inability to properly care for an infant. Each accusation was delivered with just the right note of reluctant concern, as if it pained her to speak ill of me, but her duty to Emma compelled her. "And the documentation you submitted to the court," her attorney prompted. "The guardianship papers signed by Colonel and Mrs. Mitchell?" Eleanor's expression turned regretful. "James and Rebecca were both under tremendous stress," she said smoothly. "James preparing for deployment, Rebecca recovering from a difficult birth. They agreed that temporary guardianship would be in Emma's best interest. The papers were explained to them fully before they signed. A blatant lie, delivered with perfect conviction. I felt James tense beside me. Captain Fernandez stood. "Your Honor, may I approach the witness?" Judge Watkins nodded. She carried a document to Eleanor, placing it before her. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you identify this document?" Eleanor glanced at it briefly. "It appears to be the guardianship agreement we discussed." Captain Fernandez nodded. "And these signatures at the bottom? You testified that Colonel and Mrs. Mitchell signed these knowingly and willingly, after having the terms explained to them?" Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. "Yes, that's correct." "Interesting," Captain Fernandez said, her tone conversational. "Because we had these signatures analyzed by a forensic document examiner." She handed another document to Eleanor. Then, a copy to the judge. As you can see, these aren't original signatures at all. They're digitally inserted copies of signatures from other documents, specifically from the rental agreement for your guest house, signed months before Emma was born. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the witness stand. I don't know anything about that, she said, her voice less certain now. My attorney handled the paperwork. Captain Fernandez raised an eyebrow. Your attorney falsified documents without your knowledge or instruction? Eleanor's attorney stood hastily. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is leading the witness. Judge Watkins frowned. Overruled. The witness will answer the question. Eleanor's composure cracked, just slightly. I may have provided the signatures, she admitted, but only because I knew James and Rebecca would agree if they weren't so. Distracted by new parenthood. I was acting in Emma's best interest. Judge Watkins leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, are you admitting to forging legal documents and misleading this court? The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Eleanor looked around the courtroom, perhaps seeking an ally, a sympathetic face. Finding none, she straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening into defiance. I did what was necessary, she said coldly. That child deserves better than what they can give her. James has his career, his deployments. And Rebecca? She turned to look at me directly for the first time. She was never good enough for this family. Never. The naked hostility in her voice, the spite that had always been carefully concealed behind smiles and backhanded compliments, was now fully exposed. Judge Watkins' expression darkened. Mrs. Mitchell, I've heard enough. This court does not look kindly on fraud, particularly when it involves the custody of a child. He turned to Captain Fernandez. Counselor, call your next witness. The defense calls Rebecca Mitchell, Captain Fernandez said. As I stood, James squeezed my hand. Emma, who had been contentedly playing with a silent toy in his lap, looked up at me with perfect trust in her eyes. For her, I could do this. For her, I could face anything, including Eleanor. As I took the stand and was sworn in, I felt a strange calm descend. For 7 years, I had tried to make myself smaller, quieter, less objectionable to Eleanor. I had edited my words, monitored my tone, second-guessed my every decision as a mother. But today, I would speak my truth, fully and without apology. Captain Fernandez led me through my testimony, gently but thoroughly. My relationship with James, our decision to accept Eleanor's offer of the guest house, the subtle pattern of criticism and control that had characterized my interactions with her, the formula incident, the church confrontation, the discovery of the fraudulent guardianship papers. Mrs. Mitchell, she said finally, in your own words, why do you believe your grandmother-in-law has gone to these lengths to separate you from your daughter? I looked directly at Eleanor as I answered. Because she can't control me, I said simply. And if she can't control me, she can't control how Emma is raised. She wants Emma to be a Mitchell, according to her definition, not ours. Eleanor's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to poke holes in my testimony, to suggest that I was paranoid, vindictive, unstable, just as Eleanor had claimed. But the evidence supported me, not her, and with each question, each attempt to undermine me, I found my voice growing stronger, more certain. When it was over, when I returned to my seat beside James, he looked at me with a pride that brought tears to my eyes. You did it, he whispered as Emma reached for me eagerly. You stood your ground. I held my daughter close, breathing in her sweet baby scent, feeling her tiny hands pat my face in welcome. Yes, I had stood my ground. Not just for myself, but for her. For the family we were building, free from Eleanor's shadow. Judge Watkins called a brief recess before delivering his ruling. We waited in a small conference room, surrounded by our supporters, the tension almost unbearable. Whatever happens, James said, addressing not just me but everyone who had stood with us, we want you to know how grateful we are. Your support has meant everything. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Watkins was already seated, his expression grave. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented today," he began, "and finds clear and convincing proof of fraud in the original guardianship filing. The temporary guardianship granted to Eleanor Mitchell is hereby revoked, effective immediately." Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly swayed on my feet. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the deliberate nature of Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell's deception, this court grants the petitioner's request for a permanent restraining order. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell is to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Emma Louise Mitchell or her parents. He fixed Eleanor with a stern gaze. This court also refers this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to forgery and fraud. Eleanor's face drained of color. Her attorney leaned close, whispering urgently in her ear, but she seemed beyond hearing him. Her eyes were fixed on Emma, a mixture of rage and loss that made me instinctively hold my daughter closer. "This isn't over," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtroom. "That child is a Mitchell. She belongs with me." Judge Watkins' gavel came down sharply. "Mrs. Mitchell, that is enough. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt." Eleanor subsided, but her expression remained unchanged. This wasn't over, not in her mind, but legally, finally, we were free. Outside the courthouse, under a sky that suddenly seemed brighter, we were surrounded by friends and supporters, offering congratulations, hugs, reassurances. Captain Fernandez shook James's hand formally, then surprised me with a quick embrace. "The transfer paperwork should go through without any problems now," she said. "You could be in Maryland by the end of the month." Maryland. Away from Eleanor. From this town where her influence reached into every corner. From the constant vigilance and fear. A fresh start for our little family. The thought was almost too beautiful to believe. "Really?" I asked, needing the confirmation. "We can really leave?" Captain Fernandez smiled. "Pack your bags, Mrs. Mitchell. You're going home." Home. Not Eleanor's guest house, not the Hayes' spare room, but our own place, where we could build our life on our terms, where Emma could grow up without the shadow of her great-grandmother's manipulations, where I could be the mother I wanted to be, not the one Eleanor tried to convince everyone I wasn't. As we walked to the car, Emma babbling happily in my arms, I felt lighter than I had in years. The legal battle was won. The truth had been spoken. And though I knew Eleanor might never truly let go, might always harbor resentment, and seek ways to reestablish control, her power over us was broken. We had reclaimed our family, our narrative, our future. James opened the car door, then paused, looking back at the courthouse steps where Eleanor stood alone, her attorney having already departed. For a moment, I saw something like pity cross his face. Then he turned to me, his expression resolute. "Let's go home," he said, taking Emma from my arms and settling her carefully into her car seat. "Our real home is waiting for us." As we drove away, I didn't look back. There was no need. The road ahead was all that mattered now. The Maryland morning light filtered through newly hung curtains, casting dappled shadows across Emma's crib. I stood in the doorway of her nursery, her real nursery, in our real home, watching her sleep, marveling at how peaceful she looked, how untouched by the storm we'd weathered. 3 months had passed since we'd left Texas behind. 3 months of rebuilding our lives piece by piece, day by day. Our townhouse on the outskirts of Andrews Air Force Base wasn't grand. No historic columns or sprawling gardens like Eleanor's estate. Just a modest 3-bedroom with a small backyard and neighbors close enough to hear their laughter through open windows. But it was ours, our sanctuary, our fresh start. Each room we'd painted ourselves, James and I working late into the night after Emma was asleep, talking softly about our plans, our hopes, our future. Emma stirred, her tiny fists stretching above her head as she blinked awake. 9 months old now, sitting up on her own, babbling constantly, reaching for everything within her grasp. Looking at her, you'd never know the trauma she'd endured, the battle fought for her freedom. Children are resilient that way, I thought, as I lifted her from the crib. They heal faster than we do, "Good morning, sunshine," I whispered, breathing in her warm, sleepy scent. She patted my face with dimpled hands, her favorite morning greeting. Downstairs, I could hear James moving around the kitchen, the familiar clatter of coffee cups and the low murmur of the morning news. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. I carried Emma downstairs, her weight solid and reassuring in my arms. James looked up as we entered, his smile immediate and genuine. "There are my girls," he said, crossing the kitchen to kiss us both. He was dressed for work, his colonel's insignia gleaming on his uniform. 3 months at his new posting, and already he was thriving, respected by his peers, valued by his superiors. The shadow of Eleanor's interference in his career, the calls she'd made, the rumors she'd spread, hadn't followed us here. "Big day today," he said, taking Emma while I poured myself coffee. "Are you nervous?" I considered the question as I added cream to my cup. Today marked another milestone in our new life. My first day of clinical rotations at Johns Hopkins. My nursing program had transferred smoothly, just as Captain Fernandez had promised, and I'd spent the summer completing prerequisite courses online while settling our new home. A little nervous, I admitted, watching as James secured Emma in her high chair. But mostly excited. It feels right, you know? Like I'm finally back on track. He nodded, understanding what I meant without needing elaboration. For years, Eleanor had subtly discouraged my education, suggesting that a military wife's place was in the home, that pursuing a nursing degree was selfish when James and now Emma needed me. I'd almost believed her, almost abandoned my dreams. But not anymore. "You're going to be amazing," James said, setting a plate of toast on the table. "And Emma and I will be right here cheering you on." Such a simple statement, such a profound shift from the dynamics of our old life. In Eleanor's world, my ambitions had been secondary, inconvenient, selfish. In our new reality, they were celebrated, supported, embraced as part of who I was. Not just a wife and mother, but a woman with dreams of her own. As we ate breakfast together, planning our day, coordinating schedules, I marveled at how ordinary it all felt. No walking on eggshells, no bracing for criticism, no second-guessing every decision. Just a family sharing a meal, facing the day together. The simplicity of it was beautiful. After breakfast, I dressed for my clinical rotation, while James got Emma ready for daycare. Another change. In Texas, Eleanor had insisted that leaving Emma with strangers was neglectful. Here, we'd found a wonderful daycare on base, run by military spouses, where Emma was thriving among other children her age. The first time I'd picked her up and seen her playing happily, reaching for me with a smile but not with desperate relief, I'd nearly cried with vindication. She was okay. We were all okay. The doorbell rang as I was gathering my things. "I'll get it," James called from the living room. I heard the door open, a murmured conversation. Then James appeared in the bedroom doorway, holding a thick manila envelope. "Certified mail," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "From Captain Fernandez." My stomach tightened instinctively. Any communication from Texas still triggered that response, that ingrained anxiety. I took the envelope, noting the JAG office seal in the corner. "Probably just the final paperwork from the restraining order," I said, trying to sound confident. But we both knew it could be something else. Eleanor's threats, "This isn't over," still echoed sometimes in my dreams. I opened the envelope slowly, scanning the enclosed letter. "It's from the district attorney's office," I said, relief washing through me. "They've reached a plea agreement with Eleanor. No jail time, but permanent legal restrictions on contacting us, plus community service and mandatory counseling." It wasn't unexpected. At 72, with no prior record and considerable standing in the community, Eleanor was unlikely to face incarceration, but the finality of it was still sobering. James sat on the edge of the bed, taking the letter from my hands. "So it really is over," he said quietly. I nodded, sitting beside him. "Legally, yes. But..." I hesitated, not wanting to darken the morning with old fears. James squeezed my hand, encouraging me to continue. "But emotionally?" I don't know if it will ever be completely over. Not for me. He didn't offer false reassurances or dismiss my feelings. Instead, he simply held my hand tighter. That's okay, he said after a moment. Some wounds leave scars. They heal, but they change us. The understanding in his voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was what I'd missed during those years under Eleanor's influence. This connection, this acceptance, this shared vulnerability. We should get going, I said finally, wiping my eyes. I can't be late on my first day. James nodded, standing and pulling me up with him. The past is finished with us, he said firmly. Even if we're not quite finished with it. Today is about the future. Your future. He was right. Eleanor had taken enough from us. She wouldn't take this day too. The drive to Johns Hopkins was filled with Emma's babbling from the back seat and James' steady presence beside me. As we approached the hospital complex, I felt a flutter of nerves, but beneath it, a bedrock of confidence I hadn't felt in years. I could do this. I would do this. Not despite what we'd been through, but partly because of it. The strength I'd found fighting for my daughter was still there, ready to be channeled into a new purpose. James pulled up to the drop-off area, leaning over to kiss me goodbye. Remember who you are, he said softly. Not who she tried to make you believe you were. The words hit me with unexpected force. Who was I, really? For so long, I'd seen myself partially through Eleanor's critical gaze. Inadequate, unsuitable, unworthy. Stripping away that distorted lens was still a daily practice. A conscious choice to see myself clearly. I love you, I said, meaning it more deeply than ever. Both of you. I kissed Emma's cheek, savoring her baby-sweet scent one last time before stepping out of the car. As I watched them drive away, headed for the base and Emma's daycare, I felt not the wrench of separation anxiety that Eleanor had cultivated in me, but a healthy sense of temporarily parting from loved ones, secure in the knowledge we would reunite at day's end. The hospital was intimidating in its size and complexity, but my orientation group was welcoming, my clinical instructor encouraging. By mid-morning, I was shadowing a floor nurse in the pediatric unit, observing procedures, asking questions, absorbing everything I could. The work was challenging, engaging, exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd first decided to pursue nursing years ago. During lunch break, I found a quiet corner of the cafeteria and checked my phone. A text from James. Emma finger-painted at daycare. Masterpiece attached. The photo showed our daughter covered in primary colors, beaming with messy pride. I smiled, showing the picture to one of my fellow students who'd joined me for lunch. Your daughter? She asked, admiring the photo. She's beautiful. I nodded, feeling the simple joy of a mother sharing her child. No complicated emotions, no undercurrent of judgment. 9 months old, I said. And already an artist, according to her father. We laughed, and the conversation shifted to clinicals, instructors, career plans. Normal conversation. Ordinary connection. The kind I'd missed during those isolated years in Eleanor's orbit. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with new information, new skills, new possibilities. When my shift ended, I stepped outside to find James waiting, Emma secure in his arms. Surprise, he said, grinning at my expression. We thought we'd pick you up for your first day. Maybe grab dinner to celebrate. The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. That sounds perfect, I said, taking Emma and breathing in her familiar scent, now mixed with the industrial soap of the daycare. How was your day, sweet girl? She babbled enthusiastically, clearly trying to tell me about her adventures, and I listened with exaggerated interest, marveling at how quickly she was developing, how much she changed each day. We ate at a small Italian restaurant near campus, Emma charming the waitstaff with her smiles and coos. As I twirled pasta on my fork, listening to James recount his day, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This was what family should be: supportive, joyful, connected. Not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally sound, built on love, rather than control. "I got a call from Melissa today," James said as we were finishing our meal. His sister had been our strongest ally during the battle with Eleanor, defying her grandmother to stand with us. "She's thinking about visiting next month. Would that be okay?" The fact that he asked, that my feelings mattered in this decision, was another reminder of how far we'd come. "I'd love to see her," I said honestly. "Emma would too." I hesitated, then added, "What about your parents? Have you spoken to them recently?" William and Diane had stood with us in court, but the aftermath had been complicated. They loved their son, supported our decision to leave, but Eleanor was still William's mother. The divided loyalty had created a strain that distance had only partially eased. James sighed, his expression thoughtful. "Dad called last week. They're adjusting. It's hard for them, but they're trying." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "They want to be part of our lives, part of Emma's life, on our terms. Another change, another healing. Slow, sometimes painful, but real." That night, after Emma was asleep, James and I sat on our small balcony, watching stars appear in the Maryland sky. "You haven't asked about her," he said quietly. "About how she's doing." "Eleanor." He didn't need to say her name. I sipped my wine, considering my response. "I'm not sure I want to know," I admitted finally. "Is that terrible?" James shook his head. "It's self-preservation, and you've earned that right." He paused, then added, "Melissa says she's not doing well. The legal proceedings, the community service, the counseling. It's all been a blow to her pride. And most of her friends have distanced themselves since the truth came out." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that she couldn't hurt us anymore. Sadness for the relationship that could have been. Pity for a woman so consumed by control that she'd destroyed her family. "Do you think she'll ever understand what she did?" I asked. "Ever regret it?" James considered the question, his profile thoughtful in the dim light. "I don't know," he said finally. "People like Eleanor, they don't see the world the way we do. They don't recognize boundaries or respect others' autonomy. In her mind, she was right. She was protecting Emma, protecting the Mitchell name." It was true, and it was why Eleanor remained dangerous despite the legal restrictions. She believed absolutely in her own righteousness. Any action, no matter how harmful or deceptive, was justified in service of what she wanted. "I used to think if I just tried harder, was better somehow she'd accept me," I confessed. "I wasted so much energy trying to please someone who was determined to find me wanting." James turned to me, his expression serious. "That was never about you," he said firmly. "Never. It was about her need to control everything and everyone around her. You could have been perfect by any objective measure, and she still would have found fault." He was right, I knew he was right, but 7 years of conditioning didn't disappear overnight. "I think that's why I want to work in pediatrics," I said, the realization forming as I spoke. "To help children who can't help themselves. To be the advocate I wish Emma had had sooner." James nodded, understanding. "You'll be amazing at it," he said. "You already are. You fought for Emma when it would have been easier to give in. You stood your ground when everyone told you to stay quiet." His words warmed me, not just because they were complimentary, but because they were true. I had fought. I had stood my ground. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "We both did," I reminded him. "You defied your grandmother, your family traditions, everything you'd been raised to respect. That couldn't have been easy." James looked out at the night sky, considering. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," he admitted. "Until Eleanor slapped Emma, I still believed, somewhere deep down, that she had our best interests at heart, that her interference, her criticism, her control was misguided love." He shook his head slowly. That moment in church stripped away all the illusions. No one who loves a child would deliberately hurt them to make a point. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The night was warm, the sounds of our new neighborhood a gentle backdrop, distant laughter, a dog barking, the occasional car passing. So different from the isolated silence of Eleanor's estate, where the nearest neighbor was a half-mile away and spontaneous visits were discouraged. "Do you think we'll ever fully recover?" I asked finally. "From what she did to us?" James considered the question seriously. "I think we already are," he said. "Not by forgetting or pretending it didn't happen, but by building something new, something better. Every day we live on our own terms is a day of healing." He was right. Each decision we made independently, each boundary we established, each moment of joy uncomplicated by fear or criticism, they were all acts of recovery, of reclaiming what had been taken from us. "I want Emma to grow up confident," I said softly, "to know her worth isn't determined by someone else's approval, to recognize manipulation when she sees it." James nodded. "She will. Because she'll have us as examples. She'll see us standing firm, setting boundaries, valuing ourselves and each other." The thought was both daunting and inspiring, that our healing wasn't just for us, but for Emma too, that how we recovered from Eleanor's abuse would shape how our daughter navigated relationships throughout her life. 6 months later, I stood in another hospital, not as a student but as a newly certified nurse's aide, my first step toward my nursing degree. The pediatric ward was busy, filled with the sounds of children, parents, medical equipment. A world away from Eleanor's silent, controlled environment. A world I had chosen, fought for, earned. My supervising nurse handed me a chart. "New admission in room 4, she said. 6-year-old, post-appendectomy. Parents are pretty anxious. First child, first surgery. See if you can help them settle in." I nodded, taking the chart and heading down the corridor, confident in my training, in my purpose. The room was dim, a small nightlight, casting just enough illumination to see a little boy sleeping in the hospital bed, his parents hovering anxiously nearby. The mother looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of fear and hope that I recognized all too well. "He's going to be fine," I said quietly, checking the IV line, adjusting the blanket. "The surgery went perfectly. He'll be back to normal before you know it." She nodded, wanting to believe me but still afraid. "It happened so fast," she whispered. "One minute he was fine, the next." She trailed off, unable to articulate the terror of seeing her child in pain, in danger. I touched her arm gently. "I know," I said, "but you did everything right. You got him here. You advocated for him. That's what parents do." As I checked the boy's vital signs, recording them in his chart, I thought about that word, advocate. How long it had taken me to understand that's what parents were supposed to be. Not blind followers of authority, not passive acceptors of criticism, but fierce defenders of their children's well-being. Eleanor had tried to strip that role from me, to position herself as the true protector, the wiser guardian. She had failed. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open briefly. "Mom," he murmured, still groggy from anesthesia. His mother was there instantly, stroking his hair, murmuring reassurances. I stepped back, giving them space while monitoring the machines. The father caught my eye, his expression grateful, relieved. I nodded in understanding. They were going to be okay. All of them. My shift ended at midnight. I drove home through quiet streets, the radio playing softly, my mind transitioning from work mode to home mode. Our townhouse was dark except for the porch light James always left on for me, a beacon guiding me home. Inside, the familiar scents welcomed me. James's aftershave, Emma's baby shampoo, the lavender candle I'd burned that morning. I checked on Emma first, as I always did. She slept sprawled in her crib, one arm flung dramatically above her head, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched in the other hand. 15 months old now, walking unsteadily, saying a few words, developing her own distinct personality, stubborn, curious, joyful. Free from Eleanor's influence, from the weight of expectations and judgments that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with an old woman's need for control. James was awake, reading in bed when I entered our room. He set his book aside, smiling as I collapsed beside him. "Tough shift?" he asked, pulling me close. I nodded against his shoulder. But good, I added. Really good. He understood what I meant, that the work was challenging but fulfilling, that I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was meant to do. Melissa called, he said after a moment. She has news. I sat up, curious. James' sister had visited twice since we moved to Maryland, each visit strengthening our bond, healing old wounds. She's engaged, he continued, smiling at my surprise, to a doctor she met at the hospital. They're planning a small ceremony in the spring. She wants us all there. You, me, Emma. The invitation was significant. Melissa was deliberately creating a new family tradition, one that centered on genuine connection rather than obligation or appearance. Of course we'll go, I said. I'm so happy for her. I hesitated, then asked the question that inevitably followed any discussion of family events. What about Eleanor? James shook his head. Not invited. Melissa was clear about that. She said she wants a day filled with love, not manipulation. It was the right decision, the healthy decision, but I still felt a pang of sadness for what could have been. A grandmother celebrating her granddaughter's joy, a family united rather than divided. It's still hard sometimes, I admitted, voicing the thought I rarely shared. Knowing that Emma won't have the kind of extended family I always imagined for her. No doting great-grandmother, no big family holidays. James nodded, understanding my mixed feelings. She'll have something better, he said firmly. Authentic relationships. People who love her for who she is, not for who they want her to be. He was right. Again. It was a lesson I was still learning, still integrating into my worldview. That fewer, healthier connections were infinitely more valuable than numerous toxic ones. That family was defined by love and respect, not by blood or obligation. That sometimes the bravest thing we could do for those we loved was to walk away from those who hurt them, even when those people shared our name. As I drifted towards sleep in James's arms, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the moment Eleanor slapped our baby in church, to this quiet bedroom, hundreds of miles away. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of grief for what we'd lost. But there had also been moments of profound clarity, of discovering strength I hadn't known I possessed, of building something new and beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Eleanor had tried to control our story, to write herself as the hero and me as the villain. She had failed. We had reclaimed our narrative, word by painful word, day by determined day. And the story we were writing now was entirely our own, messier perhaps than Eleanor's carefully orchestrated version, less perfect by her rigid standards, but authentic, alive, and ours. In the morning, Emma would wake us too early, demanding breakfast, attention, love. James would make coffee while I changed her diaper, the three of us moving through our morning routine with the comfortable synchronicity of a family secure in its bonds. I would leave for class, James would take Emma to daycare before heading to the base, and life would continue, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Eleanor's shadow would always be there, I knew that now. Not looming over us, not controlling us, but present as a reminder of what we had overcome, of the price we had paid for freedom, of the strength we had found in standing together against manipulation and abuse. It wasn't the story I had imagined when I married James, when I became a Mitchell. It was better, it was true, it was ours. And as I finally surrendered to sleep, one thought followed me into dreams. Sometimes the family you save isn't just your child's. Sometimes it's your own. Mommy, look what I made! Emma's voice rang through our sunlit kitchen, bright with 5-year-old pride. She held up a finger painting, wild swirls of color surrounding stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and Me. I knelt to examine it properly, making appropriate noises of admiration while wiping pancake batter from my hands. It's our family, she explained seriously, pointing to each figure. And this is our house, and this is the sun, and this is our dog. We didn't have a dog, but Emma had been campaigning for one with the single-minded determination that characterized everything she did, a determination inherited from both her parents, though James liked to claim it was all me. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "Let's hang it up when it's dry. Now go wash your hands for breakfast, okay?" She nodded, racing off with the boundless energy that constantly amazed me. 5 years since Eleanor had slapped her in that church. 5 years of building a life untainted by manipulation and control. 5 years of watching Emma grow into a confident, joyful child who had no memory of the battle fought for her freedom. James entered the kitchen, dressed in his uniform, his colonel's eagles catching the morning light. At 40, with threads of silver at his temples, he was more handsome than ever. "Something smells amazing," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I returned to the pancake batter. I leaned back against him, savoring the moment of connection before our busy day began. "Emma's asking for a dog again," I warned, turning to face him. He grinned, unsurprised. "I may have mentioned that the Hendersons' Labrador had puppies," he admitted, just as a casual observation. I rolled my eyes, unable to suppress a smile. "You're undermining my authority, Colonel Mitchell." He kissed me quickly, unrepentant. "Establishing a strategic alliance, Nurse Mitchell. Different thing entirely." 4 years of nursing school had culminated in my graduation the previous spring, followed by my acceptance to the pediatric unit at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The work was challenging, sometimes heartbreaking, often inspiring, exactly what I'd dreamed of during those years under Eleanor's shadow when my ambitions had been systematically minimized and dismissed. Emma returned, hands dripping despite her alleged washing, and climbed onto her booster seat at the table. "Daddy, did you tell Mommy about the puppies?" she asked, betraying their conspiracy without a hint of remorse. James winked at her, setting out plates while I flipped pancakes onto a serving platter. I was working up to it tactically, Peanut. Our morning routine unfolded with practiced ease. Breakfast together, discussing the day ahead, James helping Emma gather her things for kindergarten while I finished getting ready for my shift. Ordinary moments, precious in their normality, in their freedom from the walking on eggshells tension that had characterized our lives in Texas. "Don't forget we're having dinner at the Hayes' tonight," James reminded me as we all headed for the door. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Colonel Hayes now, is officially transferring command of the squadron. The Hayeses had been transferred to Andrews 2 years after us, a coincidence that had felt like a gift. Sarah and John had become our closest friends, their children now Emma's favorite playmates. "I remember," I assured him, checking my watch. "I'll be home by 5. I kissed him goodbye, then knelt to hug Emma tightly. "Be amazing today, baby girl. I love you." She squeezed my neck, then pulled back with a serious expression. "I'm not a baby, Mommy. I'm 5 years and 3 months and 12 days old." The precise accounting made me smile. "So you are. My mistake." As they drove off toward Emma's school and the base, I headed for my own car, mentally reviewing my patient load for the day. The morning was bright, promising spring warmth after a long winter. Our cul-de-sac was coming alive with activity. Mrs. Patel retrieving her newspaper, the Wilson teenagers waiting for their school bus, Mr. Gonzalez walking his corgi. Neighbors who had become friends, a community we'd built for ourselves, connection by connection. My phone buzzed as I slid into the driver's seat. A text from Melissa. "Ultrasound this morning. Will send pics of your niece/nephew later?" Red heart. James' sister, now 7 months pregnant with her first child, had blossomed since breaking free from Eleanor's influence. Her husband David was everything Eleanor would have disapproved of. Divorced, Jewish, from a working-class background, and exactly what Melissa needed. Kind, supportive, respectful of her boundaries. I texted back a quick, "Can't wait, good luck," before starting the car. The relationship I'd built with Melissa was one of the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the crisis with Eleanor. Once formal, almost cold with me, she'd become like the sister I'd never had. Our bond forged in the fire of standing together against Eleanor's manipulations. At Walter Reed, my day unfolded in the organized chaos of the pediatric ward. Medication rounds, vitals checks, consultations with doctors, conversations with anxious parents. Each child under my care became, briefly, an extension of my responsibility to Emma, to protect, to advocate, to comfort. The work filled me in ways I'd never anticipated when I first decided to pursue nursing, giving purpose to the pain we'd endured. During my lunch break, I checked my phone to find the promised ultrasound picture from Melissa, along with a text. "It's a girl! David's already planning her science fair projects." Face with rolling eyes. I smiled, typing back congratulations, then noticed another text that had come in while I was with a patient. From James, "Call when you can. Need to discuss something." The vague message sent a flutter of anxiety through me, an echo of old fears, of unexpected crises, of control suddenly slipping away. I stepped outside to the staff courtyard and dialed his number, breathing deeply to calm my racing heart. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, it's me," I said. "Everything okay?" His voice was reassuring, if serious. "Everything's fine. Just got a call from Dad. He wants to visit next month, alone, without Mom." William and Diane had visited twice since we moved to Maryland. Brief, slightly awkward visits that had gradually eased as Emma charmed her grandparents, and we all carefully avoided mentioning Eleanor. But William had never come alone. "Did he say why?" I asked, settling onto a bench beneath a flowering dogwood. "Not really, just that he needed to talk to us about something important." James paused. I said yes, but I wanted to check with you first. "I can call him back if you're not comfortable with it." Another change. Another healing. James prioritizing our united front over his father's wishes, ensuring decisions about our family were made together. "No, it's fine," I said, meaning it. If he wants to come, he should come. Whatever William needed to discuss, we were strong enough to handle it now. 5 years of building boundaries, of healing, of creating a life on our terms had given us a foundation that couldn't easily be shaken. Thanks for checking, though. I appreciate it. We chatted for a few more minutes about logistics. When William might visit, where he would stay, how long he'd be with us, before I had to return to my patients. As I hung up, I realized my initial spike of anxiety had faded quickly, replaced by calm acceptance. Progress, I thought. Real, measurable progress. The rest of my shift passed in focused activity, my mind occasionally drifting to wonder what William might want to discuss. It couldn't be good news about Eleanor. There was no good news to share. At 77, she lived alone in the same historic house, increasingly isolated as friends and family distanced themselves following the court case. According to Melissa's occasional reports, she attended church less frequently, rarely entertained, and had withdrawn from most of her community activities. I tried not to think about her often. When I did, it was with a complicated mixture of emotions. Lingering anger, yes, but also a certain pity for a woman so consumed by control that she'd destroyed her relationship with her family. Sometimes I wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, ever recognized the damage she'd caused. But those thoughts led nowhere productive, so I'd learned to acknowledge them briefly and let them go. By the time I arrived at the Hayes' that evening, the speculation about William's visit had been pushed to the back of my mind. James and Emma were already there, Emma playing with the Hayes children in the backyard while the adults gathered in the kitchen, preparing dinner together amid conversation and laughter. Sarah handed me a glass of wine as I entered. "Perfect timing," she said. "John's just about to burn the steaks." Her husband protested good-naturedly from his position at the grill, visible through the patio doors. "Caramelizing, not burning." "There's a difference, Colonel Mitchell. Back me up here." James raised his hands in mock surrender. "I never contradict the chef or my wife." Basic survival strategy. The easy banter, the comfortable friendship, warmed me as much as the wine. These moments, ordinary, unremarkable to an outside observer, were the foundation of our new life. Connections built on mutual respect, on genuine affection, on boundaries honored rather than trampled. Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing between military talk, family updates, and the children's increasingly elaborate contributions. Emma, holding court at the kids' end of the table, was recounting her kindergarten adventures with dramatic gestures that reminded me startlingly of James. I caught his eye across the table, and he smiled, recognizing the similarity too. Later, as Sarah and I cleared dishes while the men took the children for ice cream, she asked about William's upcoming visit. News traveled fast in military circles, and the Haseys knew our history with Eleanor. "Are you worried?" she asked directly, her friendship giving her the right to such frankness. I considered the question as I loaded the dishwasher. "Not worried, exactly," I said finally. "Curious, maybe a little apprehensive." I closed the dishwasher, turning to face her. "But we're not the same people who left Texas 5 years ago. Whatever he has to say, we can handle it." Sarah nodded, understanding. She'd seen our journey, had been part of our support system as we rebuilt our lives, had witnessed our growth from vulnerable young parents to confident adults, secure in our boundaries. "You know we're here, whatever you need," she said simply. "Always." The promise meant more than she could know. Having allies, real allies, not the conditional acceptance Eleanor had offered, had made all the difference in our healing journey. "I know," I said, squeezing her hand briefly, "and that makes all the difference." The evening ended with sleepy children, warm goodbyes, and promises to get together again soon. As we drove home, Emma already dozing in her booster seat, James reached across the console to take my hand. "Good night?" he asked quietly. I nodded, watching the familiar streets pass by, feeling the simple contentment of a life well lived. "The best kind," I answered. Ordinary, safe, hours. William's visit came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after his call, he arrived on a Thursday afternoon, looking older than I remembered, more stooped, his military bearings softened by age and, perhaps, by grief. James met him at the airport while I prepared the guest room and tried to explain to Emma who was coming. "Grandpa William is Daddy's daddy," I told her as she helped me put fresh towels in the bathroom. "Like Daddy is your daddy." She considered this seriously. "Does Grandpa William make pancakes like Daddy?" The innocent question made me smile. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll have to ask him." This would be the longest visit William had made without Diane by his side, the first time he'd really have a chance to know Emma as her own person, rather than as Eleanor's great-granddaughter. The possibility of genuine connection both excited and worried me. When they arrived, William looked tired but pleased, accepting Emma's shy greeting with gentle dignity. "Hello, Miss Emma," he said, crouching despite his arthritic knees to meet her at eye level. "I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." She studied him with the direct, unfiltered gaze of childhood. "Do you make pancakes?" she asked, getting right to her most pressing concern. William glanced up at me, then back to Emma, his expression serious. "I'm not very good at pancakes," he admitted, "but I make excellent French toast. Would that be an acceptable substitute?" Emma nodded, satisfied with this compromise, then ran to get the drawing she'd prepared for his arrival. William straightened slowly, his eyes following her with a mixture of wonder and regret. "She's remarkable," he said quietly. "So much like James at that age. All that energy, that curiosity." I nodded, accepting the observation for the simple truth it was, not as a comparison or judgment. "She's herself," I said, completely, unapologetically herself. The subtext wasn't lost on William, his expression sobered as he turned to me fully. "Rebecca," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "I owe you an apology, many apologies in fact, for not seeing what was happening, for not standing up sooner, for letting my mother—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "There's no excuse, but I want you to know I'm sorry, deeply sorry." The words were unexpected, the emotion behind them genuine. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. James stepped in, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "Let's get you settled, Dad," he said gently. "There's time for all of this." William nodded, allowing himself to be guided toward the guest room, but his eyes held mine for a moment longer, asking for something. Understanding, perhaps, or forgiveness. I wasn't sure I was ready to give either, but I offered a small smile, an acknowledgement that I'd heard him, that his words mattered. That evening, after Emma was in bed, the three of us sat in the living room, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. William declined the offered whiskey, settling for water instead. "I'm on new medication," he explained briefly. "For my heart." It was the first I'd heard of any heart condition, and I exchanged a concerned glance with James. Another thing kept from us, another family medical issue deemed not our business. "Why didn't you tell us?" James asked, his tone careful but direct. William sighed, setting his glass down on the coffee table. "I didn't want to worry you," he said, then grimaced at his own words. "No, that's not entirely true. I didn't want to deal with your mother's reaction if she knew I'd told you before we'd told." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor, even now, her influence shaped family communications, determined what was shared and what was withheld. "Is it serious?" I asked, medical training overriding old resentments. William shrugged, a gesture so like James it startled me. "Serious enough for medication and lifestyle changes. Not immediately life-threatening." He looked down at his hands, aged, but still strong. "But it does make a man think about his legacy, about making things right while there's still time." The purpose of his visit, previously unclear, suddenly came into focus. William wasn't here just to see us, to meet Emma properly. He was here to clear his conscience, to address the damage Eleanor had done, and his role in allowing it. James leaned forward, his expression intent. "What are you saying, Dad?" William took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I've spent too many years enabling your grandmother's behavior," he said directly. "Making excuses, smoothing things over, preserving the peace at any cost. And the cost was too high." He looked at me then, his gaze steady. "The cost was you, Rebecca. And Emma. And James's relationship with his sister, with you, with himself." The acknowledgement, so long in coming, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I can't change the past," William continued, "but I can stop perpetuating the damage. Your mother and I have been talking. A lot of hard conversations. She's still caught in the middle. Eleanor is her mother-in-law, has been for 40 years. Those bonds don't break easily." He paused, then added more quietly, "But she agrees with what I'm about to do." James and I exchanged glances, uncertain where this was heading. William reached for the briefcase he'd brought into the living room earlier, withdrawing a thick folder. "Before I explain this, I want you to know that neither of you is obligated in any way. This is about making things right, not creating new obligations." He opened the folder, revealing legal documents, financial statements, property deeds. "Eleanor is not well," he said bluntly. "Physically, she's declining. Mentally," he hesitated, "she's becoming paranoid, suspicious. She's driven away most of her friends, alienated the church community, even fired the household staff who've been with her for decades. The news shouldn't have affected me, but it did. A pang of something like grief for the relationship that could have been, should have been." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Is she getting proper care?" William nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "For now. But it's becoming more difficult. She refuses most help, insists she's fine, won't consider assisted living or in-home care." "Why are you telling us this?" James asked, his voice carefully neutral. "After everything she did, she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with us. And frankly, we've built a life without her influence." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a statement of fact. We had moved on, healed, created something new and healthy. Reopening old wounds served no purpose. William nodded, understanding. "I'm not asking you to reconnect with her," he clarified. "I wouldn't put you in that position, not after everything. What I'm doing is transferring legal control of her estate to the two of you, effective immediately." The statement hung in the air, shocking in its implications. James stared at his father, clearly stunned. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because you're the only ones I trust to handle it ethically," William said simply. "Not to use it as a means of control or revenge, but to ensure she's properly cared for while protecting the family assets from her increasingly erratic decisions." He spread the documents on the coffee table, pointing to key sections. "This gives you legal authority over her financial affairs, healthcare decisions, and property management. It does not require you to have any personal contact with her." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. 5 years ago, Eleanor had fraudulently seized control of our daughter through falsified guardianship papers. Now, legitimately and legally, we were being offered control over her affairs, as she declined into the very state she'd falsely accused me of experiencing, mental instability requiring intervention. "I don't know, Dad," James said slowly. "This feels complicated." William nodded, unsurprised by the hesitation. "It is complicated. Morally, emotionally, practically. But consider the alternatives. If I retain control, I'm constantly torn between your mother's expectations and what's actually best for Eleanor and the estate. If we allow Eleanor to continue managing things herself, she'll likely make decisions that harm herself and others." He turned to me, his expression serious. "Rebecca, I know I'm asking a lot. She hurt you deeply, tried to take your child, undermined your confidence, your marriage, your education. If you want no part of this, I completely understand. But I also know you're one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. Your work with sick children, your forgiveness of my own failures, they speak to a character Eleanor never truly saw or valued." His words touched me unexpectedly. For years, I'd defined myself partly in opposition to Eleanor, striving to be everything she wasn't, to parent differently, to love differently, to live differently. But somewhere along the way, that opposition had transformed into something more positive, more authentic. I wasn't just not Eleanor. I was fully, completely Rebecca, defined by my own values, my own choices, my own capacity for both strength and compassion. "Can we have some time to think about it?" I asked, glancing at James, who nodded agreement. "This isn't a decision we can make tonight." William smiled, relieved. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The papers are prepared, but nothing has been filed yet. It's entirely your choice." Later that night, after William had retired to the guest room, James and I sat on our back porch, the same one where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. The night was cool, stars visible through the budding branches of our maple tree. "What do you think?" James asked quietly, his profile thoughtful in the dim light. I considered the question, exploring my own reactions. "Part of me wants to say absolutely not," I admitted, "to maintain the distance we've worked so hard to establish, to protect our family from any further involvement with her." James nodded, understanding. "And the other part?" he prompted gently. I sighed, trying to articulate the complex emotions stirring within me. "The other part recognizes that this isn't about Eleanor anymore. It's about us. Who we are, what we value, how we respond to someone in need, even if that someone hurt us deeply." I turned to face him. "It's about the example we set for Emma." James was silent for a long moment, processing. "I keep thinking about what you said years ago," he finally responded. "That day we left Texas. You wondered if Eleanor would ever understand what she did, ever regret it." He reached for my hand in the darkness. "Maybe this is our chance to show her a different way, not through confrontation or revenge, but through compassion and boundaries. Managing her care ethically, ensuring she's treated with dignity, but without sacrificing our own well-being." It was a perspective I hadn't fully considered, that accepting this responsibility might be an opportunity not just to protect Eleanor from herself or others from her, but to demonstrate the very values she had rejected. Respect for autonomy within appropriate boundaries, care without control, support without strings attached. "If we do this," I said slowly, "we would need very clear boundaries. No direct contact unless absolutely necessary. Professional intermediaries handling the day-to-day management. Regular consultations with elder care specialists to ensure we're making appropriate decisions." James nodded, squeezing my hand. "Absolutely. This wouldn't be about reconciliation or forgiveness. It would be about doing what's right because it's right, not because of who it's for." The distinction was important, critical even. This wouldn't be about Eleanor at all, not really. It would be about us, about living according to our values even when it was difficult, about showing Emma that compassion wasn't reserved only for those who deserved it or had earned it, about breaking the cycle of manipulation and control that had characterized the Mitchell family for generations. "I think we should do it," I said finally, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not for her, but for us. For Emma. For the family we're building. James looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, he said simply. We'll tell Dad in the morning. As we sat there under the stars, I felt something shift inside me, a final releasing of the anger and resentment I'd carried. Not because Eleanor deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. The woman who had once held so much power over me, who had slapped my baby and called me unfit, who had tried to destroy my family, was now elderly, declining, alone. And I, the outsider she had never accepted, would now help determine her care, her comfort, her dignity in her final years. Life's symmetry could be both beautiful and painful. But in that moment, under a sky full of stars, with my husband beside me and my daughter sleeping safely inside, I felt neither triumph nor trepidation. Just a quiet certainty that we were breaking the cycle, one difficult decision at a time. That Eleanor's legacy of control and manipulation would end with her generation. That Emma would inherit something better, the courage to stand firm, the wisdom to set boundaries, and the compassion to care even when it's hard. We've come a long way, James murmured, his voice soft in the darkness. I leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, thinking of all we'd survived together, all we'd built from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Yes, I agreed simply, and we're still going. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, complex emotions, practical challenges. But tonight, in this moment of decision, I felt only peace. The final piece of our healing journey was falling into place, not through reconciliation or forgiveness, but through the quiet power of living our values, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. I love you, James said, kissing my forehead gently, more than I could ever say. I turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same certainty I felt in my heart. I know, I whispered. I've always known. And in that simple exchange was everything that Eleanor had never understood about love. That true love empowers rather than controls, supports rather than dominates, celebrates rather than diminishes. As we headed inside, I paused to check on Emma one last time. She slept peacefully, one arm wrapped around her stuffed elephant, the other flung wide in absolute trust that her world was safe, her parents steadfast, her worth unquestioned. Looking at her, I made a silent promise. The cycle ends here. The healing begins with us. The future belongs to her, unshackled by the past, unburdened by patterns of control and manipulation, free to become fully, gloriously herself. And in that promise was victory more complete than any revenge could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.